Yeah. You want to grab something?
The rocks. I know, they're so cute.
So, I'll begin. So, thank you all so much for coming tonight. And I know you're all enjoying the pizza. First, I'd like to thank NewSpace NYC so much for hosting us once again. Like all meetings at NewSpace NYC, I know this is a diverse audience. And whether you're a researcher or an innovator or an entrepreneur or just a general enthusiast, we're all here for the same reason, because we love science and because we want to do something about it. And science is really just learning about how beautiful the natural world is. And as we learn more and more about nature, it's so easy to get stuck in this idea of just being fascinated with all the details, but we kind of forget some of the practical aspects of it, like who's paying us to do this. So it's a lot like children loving to play with toys, but sometimes it's kind of easy to forget these toys cost money. And in fact, the best quote that I found about this, it was from a colleague of mine at the Fermi Lab. The difference between science and religion is that religion has an easier time raising money. And I think there's a lot of truth to this. And as I've shown in several other presentations here, one doesn't have to look far to see what a crisis science is in right now. Scientists have a very difficult time convincing the public of the need for research unless there's an obvious commercial application of it. Then there's no problem getting funded. Companies love to invest in it. But if it's just fundamental science, no matter how worthwhile down the road, it's often difficult to get funding for it. And as I've shown before, even The Onion is getting in on the act, making jokes about NASA not existing in 30 years. So there has to be some sort of new plan that we're developing for scientists to get new funding. And so in this presentation, I'll discuss innovative ways to get funding, but first I'd like to briefly describe some conventional ways. Some of these you probably have heard about before, and some might be new to you. So the most traditional approach to getting funding for your science is, of course, government grants. This is the way that's probably most familiar to everyone. The good thing about government grants is that they do have money. The budget for research is in the billions, so the two biggest ones are the National Science Foundation and the Department of Energy. And the first one has a budget of 1.3 billion, and the second is over 5 billion. And even though these seem really impressive, it's actually decreasing. And these have faced severe budget shortages the past few years. The proposal success rate from the NSF has actually decreased sharply from just a few years ago. It's now 19%. So about 1 in 5 proposals gets funded, and it used to be about 1 in 4. And it's going downhill. And the Department of Energy, they've also experienced budget cuts. Just last year, it was actually cut by 23% in fundamental physics. That's just 1 year. So this gives you an idea of how severe this is. Now, in addition to so the money is big, but it's decreasing. Another disadvantage of government grants, it's not like you can simply send them an email and they decide whether to give you the money the next day. This takes several months to prepare the grant. It takes them several months to evaluate your application. And they often don't give you the money all at once. It's often sparsed out over a process of months or even years. So this is not a quick process. You also can't simply send in a proposal of, this is what I want to do, please give me money. They have very specific sections of the research that they want to support. In fact, they not only have sections, they have subsections and sub-subsections. And you have to carefully analyze where your research fits into the scheme that they've already determined. And this is often not clear, especially if your research is really new and innovative. It's probably cross-disciplinary. It probably doesn't clearly fit into one of the schemes that they've already predetermined. Finally, there's no public outreach element. So even though they may decide to give you the money, that's it. This was evaluated internally by some committee, and they may hand you the check, but that doesn't mean the public is any more aware of the research that you're doing, no matter how fantastic. Even if you get it, it's like you've been audited. Even if you haven't done anything wrong, you have to account for every single penny that you spent. It takes a tremendous amount of time and overhead. And you might think, well, I'll apply for this, I'll try, they'll evaluate me and give me some feedback, and I'll know exactly how to improve next year. It doesn't work that way either. So I can tell you a story. A few years ago, I sent in a proposal. I described the research I had done, and I said, basically, I want to extend this in a few directions, and the feedback for why this was not successful was it was too ambitious. So the next year, I revised it a bit, I tapered down what I claimed that I would do, and the feedback the next year was, it's not ambitious enough. So you can see that the feedback doesn't really mean anything at all. And there's no partial funding. So you'll either get it or you don't. Even if you were super, super close, and someone just barely beat you out in a score, it means you get 0. In fact, I even saw on the internet, this was a flowchart for the funding process and all the complicated schemes of what happens after you submit the proposal. This was describing all the different things and the arguments that you could get in.
Drinking and cursing insomnia.
I think there's an infinite loop in here. You can just spend an infinite amount of time yelling at the program officer over the referees until you finally decide just to ignore them completely, find new collaborators, and do something else. So yeah, and this is after you submitted the proposal. There was actually another flowchart before you submit the proposal. I just wanted to focus on this. So it's a very complicated process. It's not simply sending in what you want to do and I'm telling you yes or no. So the second traditional approach is a private foundation. Now, unlike the government, the good news is that there are actually several examples of foundations. The ones that you've probably heard of, the Keck Foundation, the Moore Foundation, Kavli, which focuses specifically in theoretical physics, Sloan, and many others. Another good feature of foundations is that they can and often do award money in the millions. So it's not in the billions, like in the government grants, but it can still be pretty substantial. The bad news is, like the government, they have very strict procedures. You can't simply write to them asking for money. They also have their procedures, and these differ depending on the foundation. Sometimes they have a committee which evaluates it. Sometimes it's kind of arbitrary, and nobody knows how they evaluate it. But they do have procedures. And the success rate might be a little bit better than the government, but it's not a whole lot better. It's still only about 1 in 5.
Mark, I have to interrupt you and
Yep.
say I'm laughing because we haven't even gotten to NASA's way.
Lump that into the
Yeah.
the government one, yeah.
Not-
I didn't even.
not- yeah. Exactly. Never a straight answer.
That's what
No,
that
it's
is.
not. It's either worse than NSF or
Yeah, no,
DOE. But anyway.
yes. No, so something else about private foundations is that the personalities can be critical. It really does depend on your relationship with the people at the foundations, because it's up to them whether they want to fund you or not. And then finally, like the government, as a nonprofit, they also expect every penny to be accounted for. They don't just simply give you a gift and wish you well. They also want you to closely account for everything that you're using the money for. And like the government, it can take months or even years between when you apply and when you actually get the money. So a third traditional approach is a development office. Now, the good news about a development office, if you have one, they will take care of it for you. So you can go ahead and focus on your research, and the development office will completely take this off your plate. The bad news is, unless you're at a university or one of select nonprofits that happens to have a development team, this option probably isn't available to you. If you are an entrepreneur or an innovator, this doesn't exist, of course. Every development team has their own Rolodex, and these are, if it's a university, for example, these contacts are probably related somehow to that university. They're probably alum or a local corporate sponsor or something, so their network is kind of limited. And so you have to rely upon the contacts that they already have. And finally, even though this is their job to raise money for the university, they don't necessarily know anything about physics. In fact, they probably don't. Their job is just to raise money for the university or nonprofit as a whole. And so even though they might be able to introduce you to someone interested in funding you, they themselves can't speak about the technical details or importance of your research. And then finally, there's a huge overhead. if they do bring in money, it's not all going towards your lab. They'll take up to 40%. So those are the traditional approaches, and you've probably heard about each of those at some level before. So now I'd like to talk about innovative approaches. So this is kind of a new idea, and there have been a few examples, which I'll briefly describe. It's possible that one individual just happens to really like you, and they want to support what you're doing. This could be in the form of an award or a family office. If they like you, they'll probably give you complete freedom in your research. If they like what you've done before, they'll probably just tell you to keep doing it, and they'll give you the funds to keep doing it. You don't need time. You don't need to apply for any grants. And of course, it makes you immune to government cutbacks. The disadvantage here, these are very, very rare. In fact, off the top of my head, I can only think of about 3 that are well known from the physics community. The first one is Mike Lazaridis. You might have heard of him because he invented the BlackBerry. This is called Research in Motion, is the company. He happens to be from Waterloo, Canada. This is a suburb of Toronto. And he happened to be chatting with a physicist one day, and the physicist was bemoaning the fact that Canada didn't have any leading institute for theoretical physics. And since Lazaridis was from Waterloo and he wanted to give something back, apparently over lunch, he just wrote a check for $100 million. He said, here, go start an institute. And so they bought the land, they built a building, they hired the faculty. So from scratch, they used this $100 million to start an institute, and Lazaridis followed this up with another $50 million gift later. So it literally was one person who founded what is now Canada's leading theoretical physics institute. Yuri Milner is a Russian, he was a former physicist, so he got a degree in physics, didn't think he would have a successful career in research, went into business, became a billionaire, but still kept his passion for physics. And so one day he apparently just decided to give, I think it was $3 million to each of 10 physicists that he thought was doing amazing work. And there was no warning. He apparently just called them up and told them each, I'm giving you a few million dollars. And I actually talked to a few of the recipients, and they didn't believe it at the time. They thought it was like some sort of complicated scam, but it was actually true.
Mark?
Yep.
All right, we're just locked outside.
Oh, sorry. Welcome, everyone.
All right, thank you.
So
Grab some shirts from out there.
All right.
So this is how Yuri Milner became one of the main benefactors. So I think it's called the Foundational Physics Prize now. And in addition to the original 10, this is now an annual thing. You can nominate people online, and each year they give it to someone else. And this is more than double the cash prize of a Nobel Prize. So people are referring to this as like the Nobel Prize in Physics of the 21st century. And finally, George Mitchell was an alum of Texas A&M in College Station, Texas. He was a very successful businessman in the gas business, I believe, and he kept his passion for physics, and so he endowed the physics department, and in particular, he wanted them to start a program involving Stephen Hawking. He just personally really liked Stephen Hawking, and so he wanted them to start some program with them. And so they now have Stephen Hawking visit them for a few weeks a year, and they have research positions where you spend half the time at Texas A&M and half the time at Cambridge with Hawking. The other disadvantage is it's completely at their whim. If they just don't like your tie at lunch, they can choose not to keep supporting you. So there's no objective criteria by which they evaluate your research. They're also kind of difficult to meet. You would have to take a lot of time to establish a network in order for them to learn about you. So a second approach is public engagement. Publishing and speaking in the public circuit world is builds authority and an audience. People will get to know you and your work. And this broadens your reach and helps you attract other types of funding. So this refers back to the previous type of funding, of innovative funding. If some wealthy benefactor happened to hear you because they went to an event and you talked about what you were doing, they're probably more likely to support you after that. But of course, the disadvantage is you can't instantly create a public profile. It takes time to create the book or TV show or whatever you want to do. And then even after it comes out, you're probably not going to be a household name immediately after that. The ones that you've heard of, like Neil Tyson or Bill Nye, they spent 30 years developing their public profile. It didn't just happen overnight. So you've heard of them now because they've invested so much work over the years. And so finally, the third innovative approach is something which has only appeared in the past few years, and this is crowdfunding. The good thing about crowdfunding is that the potential audience is the entire public beyond the scientific world, not just those connected with your university or your local contacts. Anyone that's on the internet and interested in science is a potential donor to your research. Earlier, when I talked about the government and foundation grants, if you don't get it, even if you were really, really close, it means you don't get anything. But the great thing about crowdfunding is that there's at least partial support possible. Even if you don't get 100% of the goal that you were after, you should be able to get something. This gives you a foundation to build on. So a lot of times, if a group has some idea and they just want to build a prototype or a proof of principle, they can use crowdfunding to get enough money to test this idea, and then based on this success, they can use this as a springboard to apply for other grants. The nature of crowdfunding itself builds a community of supporters. The fact that people will learn about your project and become interested in supporting itself means that the public wants to get involved and becomes aware of your research. You don't have to worry about the politics also with crowdfunding. So the previous little flowchart that I described of all the complications of applying for grants, even after so when you apply for a grant, of course, this is read by a committee of your peers, and they may or may not like you. They may be working on similar things. The research that you're doing may not be fashionable, and so they may choose to reject you based on not completely objective criteria. With crowdfunding, it's the public. It's not necessarily your peers. So you don't have to worry about what any one individual person might think of your research. Even risky projects can be funded, especially in an era of government cutbacks. They choose to fund safer research. They don't want to spend a bunch of money on risky research which may not go anywhere. With crowdfunding, you can go ahead and say, this is a project, we're not completely sure it will succeed. Here are the risks, which we've anticipated. We're really excited because if it did pay off, it would pay off big. And as long as you're honest about that, the public is okay with that, as long as they can make an educated decision to support you. One of the disadvantages in crowdfunding, it requires creative marketing and public outreach. This takes a lot of time and energy, and this is related to the fact that it's not based on peer review. A lot of scientists are used to the idea of having to write a technical level summary of their research to be evaluated by other peers, and that's not at all what crowdfunding is. You're appealing to the public, and this requires marketing skills which researchers don't necessarily have, and it's a completely different skill set. So this is a big problem for a lot of researchers. Crowdfunding has been shown to work. Kickstarter itself, this is the biggest one, has raised almost $2 billion from over 200,000 projects in just the past few years. So there's no question that crowdfunding works. But of these over 200,000 projects, only about 200 were space-related. This is a very underutilized concept for getting funding for your projects. And you probably have heard of a few very successful examples. The one that you probably noticed first off was LightSail. So just a few weeks ago, they raised $1.2 million, which was actually 6 times what they even asked for. This is how successful it was. They went on a fantastic campaign. So this is probably the most famous one. The top 3, they each raised at least $1 million. The bottom ones were smaller projects, but they were also successful. So you see there's a big hierarchy in the skills that you can use for crowdfunding. But it has been shown to be successful. Now let me tell you a few reasons why crowdfunding doesn't work, after I've shown you the successes. So first, the campaign copy does not cater to the right audience. So again, this is one of the disadvantages that I told you. This relies on marketing to a popular level audience, not your technical peers. The project leaders didn't reach out to colleagues, friends, and family first. A lot of times people think that by simply placing it online, the internet fairies will magically bring them money. And I can promise you that's not how it works. People, if they see it, if they are not impressed immediately, they just go to another page. So that you really do have to invest a lot of time and forethought into what the project is before you put it online. Non-existent or minimal marketing know-how and effort. Again, same thing. And then finally, generic crowdfunding platforms don't focus their marketing efforts to support a niche. So this has not to do with the campaign itself, but where you place it. So it's very important to place it in front of people who would probably be interested in that type of topic. So the problem with Kickstarter, for example, well, the great thing about Kickstarter is that it has so many things, and the bad thing about Kickstarter is that it has so many things. A lot of people look at Kickstarter, but they're probably not at all interested in what you happen to be selling. So this is both an advantage and disadvantage, but it's a big disadvantage in the fact that there are so few space projects, there probably aren't a lot of people looking for space projects on Kickstarter. Now, something I want to emphasize, these 4 points have nothing to do with the project itself. It's all about how you market it and where you place it. So these are completely preventable problems. And it was for precisely this reason that I started Fiat Physica. This is a physics crowdfunding site specifically catering to this niche. So this focuses only on physics, astronomy, and space projects. So many of you have heard me talk about this in more detail before, so I won't go into the details. But this is our website, and you see that we advertise not only the project campaigns themselves, but we also have a blog. So we're trying to educate the public and get them to understand why physics is so important. We bring the physics enthusiast public to the site, and then once they're on the site, they see all the projects in this area. So the first advantage of this, we have a service in which we help the researchers and innovators and entrepreneurs with the marketing, because this is, their strengths are in the innovation and the research, not necessarily in the marketing. And so we specifically cater to this audience. And second, as I mentioned, because we only address these type of projects, the people coming to this site are already interested in your project. So the two ways that we can do this, so the first is what I just mentioned. We have a service in which we help researchers and innovators set up their campaign, but if you feel that you can do it yourself, that's totally fine. Like the other crowdfunding sites, you can simply upload the project, do it completely yourself, and manage it yourself. And that's completely fine also, of course. So this is a brief overview. You've probably seen crowdfunding campaigns before, but by way of a brief overview, almost all campaigns nowadays have a video. This is like the business card of the 21st century. So the first thing you see is a video. This is usually just 2 to 3 minutes. It's the project leader talking about what they're doing, why it's important, their personal path of how they came to support this. They really try to give a personal account of why this project is so important. There's the monetary goal and the funds collected so far. So this happens in real time. As people make donations, you see the balance get updated. You see the time left, because there is a finite cutoff time. It's not simply this online bank that people can make donations to for any length of time. There's always a deadline. And then the rest of the campaign has text and images. So it explains in detail about what they're doing, examples, the people involved, things like this. Unlike other philanthropy, we don't simply expect people to make a donation out of the goodness of their heart. That would be wonderful if they did, but people often like to become involved somehow. And this isn't an investment where they're buying part of your company. You can offer them rewards as a way to get involved with your research. So at lower levels, it might be simply just sending them some nice digital pictures. That's very easy. It doesn't cost you anything. For a $10 reward, at least they get something like this. At the higher level, like say $100, they might get a t-shirt with some logo on it. At $1,000, they might be able to get to Skype with a researcher. At higher levels, they might be able to have their name on it, or visit the lab, or get some really high-profile involvement. All of these things are ways that they can become involved that wouldn't be possible otherwise. You are giving them something which is very valuable to them. So they may just really like physics, and they've read books and they've watched the movies. They want to meet a researcher who did black holes, or they might want to meet someone who's building some sort of space project. You can give them something that they would not be able to obtain otherwise. So these rewards are very important. So this pretty much summarizes all of the different funding techniques. In a few weeks, we're going to be giving another presentation explaining the details of how to do this. teaching innovators and researchers exactly how to crowdfund their science. And this will be held right here, August 21st, again, very kindly hosted by NewSpace. Are there any questions? Yes?
We have a strong emphasis on any of the social media directly for the scientific community, like focusing maybe bringing a number of universities, academic institutions, not just in the United States, but everywhere.
So the question is, how do the scientists?
No, I'm asking, do you have a focus strictly on social media?
Definitely, yes. Yeah. So our platform, we're very active on Twitter and Facebook and Instagram, and people are sometimes surprised by Instagram because that's not something that you usually associate with science. That's actually our fastest growing channel. There isn't a lot of science on Instagram, but we found that people love it. They love looking at the pictures and commenting and getting involved. That was actually something surprising that we learned. One other great thing about the social media, you can access people in geographically distant places that would normally be difficult to reach. Like in third world countries, you don't normally think of them as becoming too involved in leading research, but they're now on the internet, and so they can still get involved just as much as anyone in New York City.
You've talked a lot about how you're distinct from various funding alternatives, but I'm wondering if you plan to, with your platform, engage some of these existing funding alternatives, particularly like private foundations.
I'm glad you asked, because that's actually exactly the strategy that we're using. Yes, we're very interested in working with foundations. One criticism that people have leveled at us is that we're competing with foundations or private or development teams or anything, and that's not at all true. We actually want to work with them. This is an amazing tool that foundations or development offices can be using, because it enables them to make contacts that they would never be able to make on their own. Something that we have actually already arranged with a major foundation is to arrange a matching gift. So we're working out a project where for every $1 that the public gives, the foundation matches that with $1. And in this situation, everybody wins, because of course the foundation will be prominently featured. They'll get great recognition. The public feels an incentive to give because their dollar goes twice as far, and they feel like it must be a legitimate project if this major foundation is willing to put their name on it. The research group gets the money twice as fast, of course. So yes, we definitely want to work very closely with foundations, and in fact, one member of our advisory board, she was the former director of foundation relations at Caltech. She's been advising us on an almost daily basis to deal with foundation and corporate sponsorship. So yeah, we see great potential in working with foundations or corporate sponsors.
Are they matching that in real time?
We haven't worked out the specifics yet, but in principle they have agreed to this. They do this all the time. Universities frequently have matching gifts and everything, so the idea is not new. What is new is the idea of doing it using crowdfunding. So as long as they promise to match the donations after it's done.
Because for every $1 that goes in, everyone can see the matching.
Yeah, that's just a technical issue. We'll
I have an idea for that.
But yeah, we see this as having great potential for everyone involved.
So,
Yeah.
Mark,
Yeah.
when you're talking to the scientists, what do you say to get them to come to the dark side of crowdfunding?
First, before I say anything, why do you?
Right, because right now, you know, there's not the elevator pitch, because that's too long. You know, it's like the 1-minute pitch that you give to them that says, you know, okay, this is why you need to come to crowdfunding.
What's that Dr. Phil saying? How's that working for you? I asked them, yeah, so how's your funding situation? And yeah, get a few academics together, and the conversation always degenerates into, oh yeah, this is a horrible budget crisis, you don't know what to do, people are losing their jobs. This is a very common topic. This is the first time where this is a new solution. Yes, people are kind of unfamiliar with it, but the analogy that I've been using with them, so it is kind of, like you said, some of them feel uncomfortable with it, and they view it as sort of a dark side. The way that I'm presenting it to them, it's a lot like online dating. Years ago, there was kind of a stigma attached with online dating, because the idea was that if you need to use an online dating service, there's something wrong with you. You can't meet people in the real world. And now that's not the case. It's just because it was a new technology, people weren't so familiar with it, but now kind of everyone uses it, and there are so many different versions of online dating, from OkCupid to Tinder. I think it's just something that kind of has to be embraced and understood by the community. I think it's just an unfamiliarity that makes them a little nervous.
So what do you say to them? What do you?
I ask them, yeah, have you had any budget problems? How's your funding situation? And they usually complain about it. And I say, well, you know, there's this new opportunity for obtaining funds and for getting the public involved. And a lot of them have some project. Oh, you know, if we had $20,000, we could put on this teacher's workshop. We could train local teachers about astronomy, as an example. And so there's all sorts of projects where they don't need much money, but they could use this to do some great project. But they just don't want the hassle of writing up a government grant, and there's not a clear place to go get it.
Yeah, this is actually an issue with something I was thinking of, that I'm doing some work that no one knows me, so I'm very low level, but once this comes out, there's going to be a lot of people who want to jump on the follow-up. So how about in a situation where, for instance, those people are already well funded, and they say to my people who might, back it, I'm sorry, but so-and-so already had, they got to it first, because they already had resources.
So you're worried about the intellectual property?
No, in fact, what I say is that they already get their stuff out first, because they already have the people. I'm one person or two people, and you say there's another group I know who would be very interested in follow-up, and they're like 24. And they already have it, so just saying that they can beat me by months, even if I work 24 hours a day, because there's 24 of them.
So you're worried that after you raise money through crowdfunding?
No. Once they see that,
yeah.
I imagine I'll have to say, well, this is what I have.
Yeah.
And this is what I want to do, and it could be something quite interesting. And then colleagues say, hey, that's interesting. And that much better equipped groups, already equipped groups, will just jump on and they can beat me.
There is a balance between, well, it's kind of a poker game. Showing enough to convince people that you know what you're talking about, but not showing enough that people could take your idea and run with it themselves.
Yeah.
So yes, there definitely is a balancing act. Fortunately, crowdfunding, you don't have to give technical details of what you're doing. You just have to give the basic idea. There's never any equations or anything. You just have to say, this is what I've done and why I'm an expert in it. This is an idea I have, which you can describe in kind of basic terms. This is what I'm going to use the money for to pursue it. So you wouldn't ever need to be required to give technical detail of what you want to do. It's actually more likely if you submitted it to a government or foundation committee, they would ask for technical detail. And if someone on the committee was working on something similar, there's a non-zero chance that they could steal it, and I've heard of that happening. So it's actually more likely to happen when you have to give the technical details. So here, yes, it's on the internet, but it's a popular level marketing. Yes?
Do you ever consider actually working with any large endowment funds? Like two of the largest endowment funds that I ever have heard of is Harvard and Yale. Harvard has $32 billion in their endowment fund. Yale has 27, if I'm not mistaken.
So Harvard definitely has the largest endowment in the world.
In the world, bar none.
I have spoken with someone in the development office at one of those two universities.
The lady that's actually in charge, I think is a woman. I don't recall the name, but apparently she wants to diversify that and build up more of Harvard's endowment fund. And one of the things that they were talking about was crowdfunding.
I've spoken with several development offices, and their reactions have ranged from they see the potential for this, they see that this is going to be important in a few years, to some who I think it's the online dating analogy, they're just kind of weirded out by this whole new idea. But I think in 5 years, this will be completely standard. to me, this seems like the greatest tool that they've ever been given because, as I mentioned, they only have contacts for a certain demographic, right? People who are already connected with that university. This reaches to the entire world who is into physics or astronomy or space. And so when people support a particular project, we have to give the names and email addresses of all those supporters to that research group, to the project leaders. And so they can take those names and emails and follow up those leads as they wish. This is an amazing tool for the development office. They not only get the money, they also get all these leads that they can follow up. I think as soon as they realize this, they're going to be jumping on this. I think it just hasn't really sunk in yet. It's just new technology. They don't understand. They feel maybe that their jobs are threatened by this, but that's not at all the case. This is a fantastic tool for them. But yes, I've spoken with several development offices, and I've gotten several different reactions.
Well, maybe the way to do it is to have the scientists behind you. So when you have the scientists, you have the project, then you can go to these guys and say, look, here's your silver platter and all this stuff on it.
Yes, I could give you specific incidents that has happened in a few cases. Right now, this has happened in more than one case, where the researchers do want to use crowdfunding, and the administration has kind of put a stop to it. But in just the past, in 1 year that I've been working on this, I've actually seen a big change in the attitudes. A year ago, they didn't even know what I was talking about. Now they've heard of it and they're kind of considering it, but they're on the fence. I think exactly as you said, if the researchers push for this, they're going to change the policies. A lot of these policies are from 60 years ago. So a lot of development offices have rules against using external fundraisers. It makes complete sense if this is just to prevent professors from hiring their own personal fundraiser for their research, because the university pays the development office and they can't have this being bypassed. So that makes total sense, but it's from 60 years ago. It obviously doesn't apply to something like crowdfunding. So I think as soon as the development offices realize this isn't a threat, it's a tool, they'll change the policies accordingly.
There might be a conflict also with the development office if you look far enough ahead, whereas these development offices as part of the institution often take percentages with respect to the work that's produced. And with crowdfunding campaign platforms, there's no equity component. So there is certainly an advantage to the researchers, but I could see a disadvantage to the universities.
Yeah, no, they will have to rethink some policies, their advantages and disadvantages.
But yeah, I mean, you can build the cost in. I mean, you know, if you budget what you're looking for. I mean, the problem with universities is that their overhead is just ridiculous.
Well,
so it's hard to do that into some kind of crowdfunding project. But you know, if they get reasonable, you could add those admin costs.
True. I was speaking more towards the intellectual property components of the research that's produced, which I guess it might be if they're part of the institutional paradigm. I guess that it's still owned in part by the university.
Yeah, it's still part of the overhead. I mean, that's what the universities think of it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, we don't make any claims on their IP. Yeah, they can work that out themselves. Yes.
There might be two kinds of ideas or innovations in physics, for example, or even math, that somebody might be thinking about. First, I think, I'll use an example. I happen to have a patent in lensless photography. I don't mind saying that because it expired 5 years ago. But when I first thought of it, and I went to my boss in a small company, I said, I think we should file on this idea I have. And he said, how much is it going to cost? I said, we could probably do a patent and get it covered for $5,000. He said, well, what is the idea? I said, I can't tell anybody. I will tell you that inventors, when they first get their idea, even hope they don't talk in their sleep. They really, we don't want to tell anybody. And he owned the company, and he said, Jim, we worked together for 12 years, and I own the company. You can tell me and find the idea. But it's not a big deal. But so that's a thing somebody might think about, and they might discover that, hey, I can take a fluorescent light bulb that's used and turn it into a laser by putting a frozen ice cube with a special chemical, and it's worth $100 million. So They're not going to tell you that. They don't even want to, especially put it out to 100 million people. But there's another kind of an idea and an innovation. A physicist, it's not me, but I'm a consultant and I work for a couple of small colleges in other stuff. But there might be a physics professor in a college but it doesn't have very good students. The college is known for hiring, training BOCES people and people who do truck driving. And it's a junior college. And he says, but I just could find some kids to come in here. I could have a crackerjack physics department. I'm here to teach them. And I just need 10 students, and all they got to do is be national merit finalists, have 800s on their SATs. They probably already applied to Stanford, MIT, and Carnegie Mellon, and all those places. Hey, I'm going to show them how they could come to this little college, this sleepy college in southern Indiana, and get themselves on the map and come out of here possibly with Nobel Prizes. And I'm a great physics teacher. All I want to do is give 5 good people a $50,000 scholarship each. You can ask the world about that, and the world can say, hey, I was going to donate to my school anyway, but this guy might really be pretty good. He's written a textbook, he got screwed by a big company, and now he's back out and he wants to do something for the world. I'll help him do this. So nobody's going to say, oh, I'm going to steal his idea. He wants to build a physics department in a sleepy school. I'll do that. No, they're not going to say that. They can't do that. But they do need $200,000. So would that be a better kind of an idea, a program, rather than the thoughtful discovery that you could be Charles Goodyear and mix sulfur with rubber, and you would have, and all of a sudden you've got rubber that doesn't melt. I mean, that's what he did on his kitchen stove. He's not going to tell you this. He goes and invent Firestone by his own self.
Yeah, ideas which you really are afraid of people stealing are probably not ideally suited for crowdfunding. That's true. But
is it mostly going to be about programs and changing the world through preaching and getting ideas started, rather than discovering in your kitchen something and you say, I don't think anybody ever noticed that it glows in the dark, you know? We don't totally know how lightning bugs fly. But somebody might say they figured it out, and I want another $1 million to get my last step done. But maybe a program is something else.
Yes, there's a lot of possibility for different projects. Yeah.
I'm wondering if you thought about the philanthropic angle to this. Like, you talked about engaging foundations, right? And what you have there is essentially wealthy individuals who came from a science career, made a lot of money, and they say, I want to donate money. One of the things I care about is science. I'll donate money to science. What about all the other high net worth individuals who want to donate to something they care about, but physics just doesn't really has like a branding problem, right? It's easy to donate money to breast cancer research, very hard to donate money to physics. So like, would part of your platform be kind of branding physics the right way, like transistor, GPS, and so forth, and going after high net worth individuals who otherwise might not donate to?
Absolutely. So several of the presentations that I've given, I often start out by pointing out how relevant physics is to our everyday life, because I think this is the big problem of why people don't get more involved in physics. With the breast cancer example that you gave, all of us know what breast cancer is. Even if we don't understand medical detail, we understand that it's bad, and a lot of us have been personally affected by something like that. So we understand this is something important to give our money to. With physics, it just seems so inhuman, and what does it have to do with me? And that's something that crowdfunding has this tremendous ability to change, because you see all the different projects, all the different types of people all over the world wanting to set up projects, and they can explain how this is important to your daily life. So yes, I think there's definitely something that can come across.
But even then, with cancer, I mean, the history of it, people outside of those who were affected, or doctors, whomever, didn't really catch on, didn't come to support it until it had an emotional factor.
Exactly, yeah.
And it's, so, I mean, I think it gets beyond the, how is this relevant to me? it's even more than that, and you know, it's what we talk about when we talk about space. I mean, what is it that grabs somebody, and that I think is where you have to. That's the nut, the kernel that you have to find in these projects.
So this is one reason why we've been actively trying to get involved in space projects, is because this is the perfect example of how useful physics can be, but also, yes, when we were children, all of us saw spaceships and learned about the space program, and we got very emotionally attached to this. And so this is a great example of where the technology can lead us.
But we're also, but talking about physics, though, I mean, sort of getting back to Chris's point and the philanthropic thing, and looking at it as the whole. I mean,
I just think the philanthropic part of it is actually quite massive. I mean, like, you just look at how many dollars are donated per year to philanthropic causes, and all of those causes have very good marketing behind it. So it's just, you know, you need to think about competition in the context of philanthropy. It's kind of a contradiction in a sense. But nonetheless, it's like, you got to figure out what that kernel is for physicists. So like, you're tapping into the space, you know, everyone's moved by the you know, rockets going into space and in 1969 and so forth, but it's like, what is that kernel of curiosity for physics? And maybe physics doesn't need to be one big monolithic term. Maybe you can even make it more specific. I mean, you have biophysics, which is, you know, has new kinds of potential treatments for cancer, for example. So that's much closer to the breast cancer example, but also like, you know, superconductor physics, you know, faster quantum computers and sort of more sci-fi-ish things. I mean, people are moved by different things, but these are all things that need attention in how they're branded. I think that the physics community by itself is something that needs.
Yeah, I mean, get to microgravity research. I mean, there was a big conference this past week in Boston, ISS R&D, and if you saw some of the stuff that was coming out of there, I mean, to the effect that they're talking about how that research has impacted life on Earth, not how it will, but all of, and you know, Julie Robinson, who's the chief scientist of ISS, listed all of that stuff, and that to me was very compelling, and to go through that, you know, what she was talking about there.
So,
throwing a lot at you.
Yeah.
So the example that you talked about with cancer, yes, giving money towards medical research is more obviously emotional. But an advantage that physics has is giving money towards medical research is palliative. We're just trying to solve a problem which already exists. We're trying to minimize it. The great thing about physics and space research is that you're actually pushing the human race forward. You're doing something which has not been done before. And it takes a little more work to figure out how to market that, but that's a huge advantage. You don't have to talk about bad things that have happened that you're trying to solve. You can actually talk about exciting good things that you want to do in the future. So that's an advantage that physics and space has that the medical field doesn't have. Any other questions?
Did you ever consider actually communicating? There's a library called the Grant Research Library, and they have like thousands of different foundations all around the world. I think it would be massively cool if you actually got their entire database and then communicate with them on your.
We did.
You did.
Yes, we have. So this advisor that we have that was formerly at Caltech that's been working with us, yes, she has access to that database. And for a few projects that we've been involved with, she has gone through the database and looked at relevant foundations or corporate sponsors.
And they kind of know the criteria is what's needed.
Yeah,
So,
yeah, and this is a direction we want to expand in. We've only done a little so far, but we want to get more involved in exactly this.
how long did they respond favorably directly to your direction?
We were the first crowdfunding site that had ever approached most of them, and so a lot of them just said, "Oh, that's an interesting development. We're curious. We'll see how. We'll stay posted on how that develops." One foundation did sit down with us and say, "We're interested in helping you and matching donations, and we're now negotiating on which project." So even in a year, I've actually seen a lot of positive movement on this. Again, I think it's just a matter of time. We're the first, and so people are kind of cagey about it. But as soon as they see how much this can benefit everyone, I think this will be a standard part of philanthropy.
Is there an area of physics you'd like to see more money going into?
The area that I was in, string theory and cosmology, but no. No, actually, I think space is probably the one I'm most excited about, because I think it can do the most. It can do the most to help humanity right now. With theoretical physics, what I used to do, it does take some time to do this. So, like the Higgs boson, CERN, for example, is very exciting, but it does take a long time. It's not clear how discovering the Higgs boson will help us. But the space stuff, I think that's just amazing, and that will help us in the next few years. Yes.
Excuse my sore throat. What is the latest platform or model that exists for raising money, philanthropy, anything that deals with raising money for projects that exists that was successful in the past few years that kind of matches up to what Fiat Physica is trying to do?
You're asking, are there similar examples?
Something like, what's the most similar?
The most similar thing is a site called experiment.com. And they're similar in that they focus only on science. So it's a crowdfunding site just for science. And it's been very successful. They just went through an investment round. They raised a lot of money, and they're being heavily invested into. They're different, though, in that they have no managed campaign service. They don't provide any service to help researchers and innovators set up the campaign. You're completely on your own. You could hire someone on your own if you wished, but there's no service on that platform to help you. You're on your own. And second, it's all of science, not just physics, astronomy, space. And so you might have physics, but you will also probably have geology or archaeology or biochemistry or something. And so again, that kind of negates this advantage of having a niche crowdfunding platform. They will get more people looking at the site, but it's less likely that that traffic will be interested in your project. So that's different.
Have you ever tried to approach anyone, say, like in Silicon Valley, any like the big wigs, like Elon Musk, Eric Schmidt, Larry Page, anybody like that?
I am aware of these people, and
because I have a friend that knows actually Eric Schmidt. He knows him very well.
Yes, I'd love to sit down with Eric Schmidt. Thank you. Yes, yes. The two groups of people that I think would be most likely to give large donations to this are people in Silicon Valley, so people who are involved with technology and see how important it is, and also former physicists. Like the example I gave with Yuri Milner, he was a physicist, got a degree in it, didn't think he'd make it as a researcher, went into business, became very successful, gave millions back. The other well-known example is Jim Simons. So Jim Simons was actually a math prodigy. He ended up department chair at Stony Brook. There's actually a theory named after him, the Chern-Simons theory, which shows up in string theory. Decided he had just done everything he was going to do in math, but he might want to use this for business purposes. So he started something called Renaissance Technologies, which is probably heard a somewhat successful hedge fund company.
Yes, they're in Long Island.
Yes, they're on Long Island. Exactly.
$10 billion, and he only hires mathematicians to work with. That's it.
Yep. So when he started the company, he actually brought a few string theorists with him.
Actually, I was going to approach him right before starting a hedge fund for space technologies and for maker spaces. Okay, what would you do with? I literally created a hedge fund directly for what we're talking about.
Yeah.
And app investments.
I would like to talk with him at some point. But the great thing is that he didn't forget his physics roots. He's actually been extremely generous in supporting the physics community. So he started the Simons Foundation, which has been very generous in giving out grant money. He personally, so there's an experiment called RIC on Long Island. Due to budget cuts, they were going to shut down before they could finish an experiment. Jim Simons personally financed that experiment to keep running for a few days so they could finish the experiment. That was not cheap. Yeah, so that was really amazing that he personally paid for them to finish this experiment. So that's the type of wonderful support that some former physicists have given. So again, former physicists and people in Silicon Valley who use physics in their technology, these seem like the two groups of people most likely to support physics initiatives.
Well, thanks, Mark. Yeah.
Thanks.
So, yep, August 21st, we'll have the talk 2.0, go into more detail. And yeah, check out fiatphysica.com.
Yep. Super. Thank you.
I think there's still lots of pizza outside.
Thank you.